Let's talk about what I read in March. Nope. Let's talk about what I read in April. I'm going to have two wrap-ups this month. I'm going to have the what I read in April, which is this video, as well as a recent reads video, just to kind of talk about some of the books that I forgot to talk about in other wrap-ups, because I'm terrible at making sure I get everything that I've read in a wrap-up. This is wrap-up part 1, stuff I read this month. The first thing I finished was Sinister Wizardry by Eva Chase. This is the third book, I believe, in this smutty series that I've been reading. It basically revolves around a main character who finds out that she has magical powers. She never knew that. She also never knew that she was stolen from her original family. Now, her original family were fearmancers, and the family that kidnapped her and took care of her were joymancers. They're kind of what they sound like. Fearmancers get their magical abilities from scaring people. Joymancers get their magical strength from inspiring joy in people. After finding all this out, she ends up going to this academy of villainy, essentially, because she actually was stolen from a family that's very high up in their academy. Like, she's one of the founding families, and her parents were actually killed when she was kidnapped. And so now she's kind of got to navigate all of the new political whatever that's happening in the school, as well as just trying to get these magical abilities that she just realized she has, because all of the students are way ahead of her because they've been doing this since birth. Now, this is a reverse harem, so she ends up having different romantic entanglements with each of the sons of the other founding families. It starts off as a bully romance and then becomes hate to love. I have felt pretty much the same about all 3 of the books I've read in the series. They have all been 3 stars. They're very easy to read. The writing's pretty decent. I enjoy them, but I'm not loving them. And I think that mostly comes down to the fact that it's just really slow burn. I'm hoping that in the long run, that will mean that I end up really loving these characters eventually, although it is definitely taking longer than I wish it would. There are 4 different boys, I believe, and so far, I really only am interested in 1 or 2 of them. I just don't feel like they have super strong personalities yet. But the main character herself does have a strong personality, and I do feel very attached to her, and I think that's probably where the book really shines. I don't feel like the magical system has been that well explained, but obviously this is a smutty romance book, so I'm not sure if that's super important. I do feel like she keeps making really dumb choices, which is frustrating. But overall, I do like her. I think I will continue on in the series because, like I said, it's just so easy to read, especially when I'm looking for something in between, some tougher reads and some more serious books. This is a good go-to. And I will say, the few sex scenes that there are really, really good. The next book I read was another smut book. Usually I put my smut books at the end, but I guess I'm putting them at the beginning this time. I read the second book in a duology called Lotto Trouble by Anne Denton. I read the first book in this duology in my first video in my 50 Shades of Smut series that was all about reverse harems. I really enjoyed the book. I wasn't expecting to. It's about a main character whose best friend wins the lottery and hires her to kind of run this bachelor style competition to pick men for a harem for her. It's very wacky and very romantic comedy, and I'm not usually one for that because I do think comedy books, comedy anything, I guess, really just works or it doesn't. It really depends on what your sense of humor is. So if the book's sense of humor isn't for you, then the book isn't going to be for you. And it definitely took me a while to get into the book. It definitely took me a while to vibe with the humor, but once I did, I really ended up loving it. And I think what it really came down to is I really, really love the 3 love interests. They're so completely different because, yes, the main character does end up in her own reverse harem. I found that each of the love interests were very, very distinct, very different, very unique from any other smut books I've read. And the sex scenes were fucking A+. Even though there was only 3 of them, I adored them. So I decided to pick up the second book. That was all about the first book. The second book, it takes on more of an action story, and that definitely didn't work for me nearly as much as the first book did. I'm not going to go into it because obviously, like I said, this is the second book, so I can't really spoil anything, but I much preferred the first book. This one I gave 3 out of 5 stars. I still enjoyed the characters, so I still enjoyed the book. I think the duology is definitely worth your time if you're at all interested, but I did like the first book a lot more. The action stuff wasn't really for me. The next book I read was The Death of Evelyn Hardcastle by Stuart Turton. I started this a while ago and I was really loving it, but it was so dense that I just found myself not being able to finish it because I just didn't feel like I had the mental capacity at the time that I started it to finish it, but I was really enjoying it. Now, this is about a man who wakes up in this mansion. He doesn't remember who he is or how he got here. He just knows that he's in danger as well as somebody else. There is some body switching going on. There is kind of looping of the same day over and over again. Those are all things I really love, and then you add in a murder mystery and I just adore it. Essentially, he has to figure out who is trying to kill this character, Evelyn Hardcastle, in order to finally break out of this loop and leave the mansion. Now, I just love this. Like I said, I put this down, DNF'd it last year, or maybe it was even a year before that, I'm not sure. But I restarted the book because I wanted to make sure that I knew what was happening. And I just, I loved this. It was so expertly layered, so much detail, and so much misdirection, and I mean, not even misdirection, just distractions because there's so much going on. I love the way that each of the different bodies he inhabited kind of influenced his choices, influenced the way he was thinking. I thought that was so smart and so well done. And I also really loved the ending. I didn't think we were gonna get answers to certain things, like why this was happening, but God, I thought that was so interesting. And I would love to see this become a series. I would love to see more books in this vein. I'm definitely gonna read Stuart Turton's other book. I already own it and I'm so looking forward to that. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I just love this so much. The idea that this is a debut novel is insane to me. The one caveat I will say with this book is that there is some pretty bad fat phobia. There is this one body that he inhabits that he will not shut up about how fat the character is. He cannot go a single paragraph without mentioning it, and it's kind of gross. It just didn't need to be there. It added nothing to the story. If you were going to mention it, why wouldn't you just mention it once and move the fuck on? So that was gross, and I hated that, and I hope that that doesn't come up in his other novels. But other than that, the book was fucking perfection. I also did another reading vlog this month, which was based around buying a TBR. So I filled out a questionnaire, explained all my preferences, and then this service picked 4 books out for me that they thought I would like. And I read those. I have a reading vlog for that on my channel, but I'm gonna kind of quickly summarize what I thought about those books. The first one was Luminous Dead by Starling. This was about a woman who goes cave exploring, and she's hired by this company, but she doesn't have a lot of experience because she lied on her resume, and now she's down here having to rely on this one other person for her survival, and things are going wrong, and it's part horror, part sci-fi, and this didn't work for me whatsoever. It started off so strong. I thought I was gonna love it. A lot of these fears are fears I have myself. I'm kind of claustrophobic. I don't like the idea of being lost. All that scares the crap out of me, and so I thought this was really gonna work for me, but it really didn't. It relied a lot more on the personal aspects between the main character and the her boss, the person who's kind of her lookout and in her headset that she's talking to, and it just relied a lot on the paranoia of having to rely on this person that she doesn't know. And it honestly just was way too long for what it was. It went around in circles and just repeated the same storylines over and over again. So I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. I wish that I'd liked this. The second book I picked up for that reading vlog was The Club by Wurger. This one frustrated the hell out of me. This book was about a boy who is kind of on his own, and because his parents have died, then his aunt, who is his last remaining relative, asked him to come to the university that she works at and join this thing called the Pit Club. She has kind of this mission for him while he's there, but she doesn't want to tell him what it is. She wants him to get into the club first, and kind of goes on from there. I enjoyed the writing of this. I thought it was pretty decent. It was very short. It was 250 pages, and it did a good job of, it did a decent job of making me like the character, making me understand his loneliness and who he is, and kind of finally finding people to belong with. As a woman, it was very clear where this story was going. And at first, I thought the book was doing a really good job because it was kind of showing just how, like, the idea that women were getting raped at the Pit Club, that they were having these parties and raping these girls, it just never even occurred to the main character. And I feel like because he's like a guy, like a young guy who doesn't really have a lot of experience in the world, like that makes sense that that wouldn't occur to him, whereas being a woman reading it, like that's the first thought I had. And so I thought that was pretty true and authentic, but unfortunately the book really fucking frustrated me after that, because I actually rated this 4 stars at first and have lowered my rating to 2 stars because, like, I did enjoy my experience. The writing was good. I would read another book from this author. I just don't like the story. I don't like where the story went. The writing did a good job of having kind of a satirical take on this academic setting and poking fun at the types of people who go there and love it, and the types of people who aspire to go there, like who make this entire thing their personality. But where the book ended off, it clearly wanted this guy to be a hero. Like, you're clearly meant to like the main character and to feel like he did the right thing, which isn't really what I needed or wanted. When I finished this book was right around the time when Sarah Everett was found, and I'm just so angry hearing more and more stories every day, all the time, about women being taken advantage of, about women being killed, about women being abused and raped, and it just felt, I was just so angry at this book because it took such a passive look at what was happening. You know, we have this book from this male point of view, and he's very passively connected to these women who were raped. There were women in his life that were raped, but it barely affects him. And so, like, why is the book from his point of view? If I'm gonna read about this topic at this point in my life, like, I want the book to be as mad as I am, and that's not what this book was. And I just didn't understand the point of it. The third book that I finished for this reading vlog was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I loved this. I thought this was so great. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I thought that the writer did such a good job of just like putting in little bits and pieces and keeping this sinister tone throughout. Like, no matter what, you definitely got the paranoia and that something bad was happening as the main character slowly watched her community being taken over. You got to see the daily microaggressions of her life, but also you got to see that this was something else, that there was something more going on. But there, of course, was always that question of like, well, is this just your everyday racism, or is this something even more cruel? I wasn't as invested in the love story, I think because I didn't love Theo. I do think he was somewhat of a realistic character. I kind of liked that he was a bit of a doofus. He was definitely privileged in the sense that, like, he didn't necessarily know what he was talking about at most times, in the same way I guess that many of us don't, because we've never experienced it. And he didn't realize the harm that he was doing, even with good intentions. And the ending, I adored the ending, and I just thought it was so well done, so effective, so creepy, and like, it was just so good. The middle of it kind of wasn't my favorite, but that's because, like I said, like, I wasn't invested in the love story aspect of it, so it was harder for me to like want to pick it up in the middle, but like the rest of it was great. And then the last book I picked up for this vlog was Shining Girls by Lauren Beukes. This was essentially about a serial killer who could travel through time. There were girls that he wanted to kill, and so he would travel to those different time periods and murder them. The other main perspective was from this woman named Kirby, who had almost died at the hands of the serial killer, but she had gotten away, and so now she's trying to figure out who had done this to her. Unfortunately, I really didn't love this one. Like, this one really disappointed me because it just kind of went nowhere. It was interesting to see the different decades. It was interesting to see the girls in those different time periods and see just like how affected they were by being a woman, no matter what year it was. I feel like the characters were well explored and I knew who they were, but it was still just like 400 pages of not much happening. So I gave this 2 out of 5 stars. Now the rest of the month kind of consisted of me listening to a lot of audiobooks. This was just the month of audiobooks apparently. The first thing I listened to was The Last Victim by Jason Moss. This was really good. This was like very, very interesting. This was about a guy who started writing serial killers when he was, I believe it was either like right before he got out of high school or when he first got to college. He basically would write to them and kind of design himself to be the perfect victim, to be exactly like the type of guys that they murdered. So we talked to people like Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer. Like, he literally talked to some of the worst serial killers in history. The one he really connected to, though, the one he really had like the longest going relationship with, was John Wayne Gacy. This book was very hard to listen to at times because, I mean, it was clearly taking over his life. In trying to be the perfect victim, he tried to endear himself to the things that Gacy liked. So he pretended to be interested in his younger brother, and John Wayne Gacy was trying to teach him how to seduce, or, I mean, other words, molest his younger brother, which, I mean, obviously he wasn't actually doing these things, but it was just so uncomfortable and disgusting to listen to, and to know that John Wayne Gacy, like, obviously did these things and used these methods to overtake younger men. It was a really interesting read to really get in the heads of these types of people, as well as to get into the head of someone who's trying to psychoanalyze them. I gave it 4 stars. I definitely had to take some breaks here and there, which happens because it was very dark subject material. Sometimes I'd be eating, listening to it, and I'm like, okay, no, this is time to stop. It was also really interesting hearing about this time when he went to visit him and just how much of the prison and how much of the guards and stuff that Gacy had in his pocket as well. What I will say is I found out after, when I was Googling something, that the author of this book actually committed suicide, so that was a very depressing fact as well. But if you're the type of person who's at all interested in true crime, I definitely think this is a must read. The next thing I listened to was Felix Ever After by Kacen Callender. I really needed something to pick me up after The Last Victim, so this was the book I went to next to bring a little bit of joy back in my life. Most people here probably know what this book is about. I feel like this took BookTube by storm. I haven't been really reading YA, but I'm really glad I picked this book up. I actually gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I thought for sure I wasn't gonna love it nearly as much as everyone else because, like, I just don't love YA as much as most people here on BookTube, but I adored this. I thought this was so sweet and lovely. It did such a good job of exploring just the messiness of being a teenager, the messiness of identity and preferences, and just, you know, there was just the perfect amount of romance and drama and just happy little tidbits and friendship, and I really love this. I thought the author did such a good job of, like, immediately making his character well known and distinct, and making his character really easy to connect to, like, right from the start. I love the way the family dynamic was explored. I love that him and his dad had this, you know, close connection while also still dealing with a lot of problems. You know, he wasn't the perfect father, but he wasn't like any of the other parents we see in teen novels where he just didn't exist. I also really like the way they brought in a couple characters who were just shitty people. Like, I loved Marisol's character. Like, I didn't like her, but I loved her inclusion in the book to show kind of what a TERF can look like. I thought that was really smart and done really, really well. Just the way that she presented her arguments and kind of went after Felix in an aggressive way while believing wholeheartedly that she was right and trying to present herself as having some sort of woke feminist opinion when it was just, like, clearly TERF related bullshit. And yeah, I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. This is one of the better YA books I've read in the last couple of years. The next thing I read was The Couple Next Door by Shari Lapena. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I actually really like this. I didn't think I would because I read An Unexpected Guest by Shari Lapena and did not like it at all. So this book is a thriller. It is about a couple who goes next door to have just like a dinner with her friends, and when they come back they find out that their baby is missing. They had gone over there with just a baby monitor because their babysitter had canceled at the last minute, and they're just next door. They went back and checked on the baby every 20 to 30 minutes, and so they expected everything to be fine. Now, I had a bit of trouble when I first started this because I know the case that this is pretty clearly based off of. I watched the Madeleine McCann documentary series a while back, and I feel like this is very clearly based on that. And I was so frustrated watching that documentary series. I kind of hated it because just like the way that everybody's clearly blaming the parents for what happened when like their child was taken, like literally the worst thing that could have ever happened to them has happened to them, so maybe you can cool it with the blame and guilting them. And so when I started this book, I felt the same way, like just watching the cop blame the two parents and just like feeling so frustrated. And so eventually I really had to kind of like force myself to separate the true crime it's based off of and this book. And once I was able to do that, I really enjoyed the book. I enjoyed where it went and what it did, and I just thought it was like a fun ride. I essentially listened to it all in one sitting. I don't think this was anything like insanely great or something you've never heard before, but I thought like what it did well. It was just a solid, fun thriller. The next thing I listened to was There's Someone Inside Your House by Stephanie Perkins. So I thought this was going to be a lot different than it was. This is about a town where a serial killer pops up, people start dying at their school. It is from one character's point of view and kind of her relationship that's blossoming with her ex-boyfriend. Now, I thought this was going to be like a true slasher. I don't know where I got the idea that, first of all, I thought it was happening in one night at a party for some reason. I don't know why I thought that. That had nothing to do with anything. But I also just thought this was a slasher, and I feel like it was not at all. That I got from everybody talking and saying it was a slasher. That I just don't feel like is true. You really don't see a lot of the deaths. You just kind of hear about them tangentially. Like, this girl goes to school and her classmates are the people who are dying, so that's how she hears about it. I feel like this book was doing something completely different than what I was expecting it to be doing. I feel like this book was more just looking at like what tragedies like this look like and and kind of like how students are affected by things like this. Not serial killer situations or anything, but just like by students in your school dying. And by the way, like other students talk about those students and how everyone looks at that type of situation and judges that type of situation. Now, I don't necessarily think it was doing any of these things well. I don't think there was a ton of depth. I think if you relate to the two main characters and like those two main characters, then the book will work for you, and if you don't, then you're not gonna love it. And that's kind of where I landed. I like the characters enough, but I didn't love them. But because the book just really focused on those two characters and their love story, I just ended up giving it 3 stars. It wasn't really for me, and I feel like I'm already forgetting it, even though I literally just read it last week. The next book I read was A Stolen Life by Jaycee Dugard. Now, this was quite a depressing read. This was probably the most depressing thing I've ever listened to. This was about Jaycee Dugard, who was kidnapped by a couple and hidden away in their house for 18 years. The man who kidnapped and raped her fathered 2 children of hers, and she kind of had to go on to raise these children in this household before she finally escaped captivity when she was 29. This was a pretty detailed book. She kind of, especially near the beginning when she first was kidnapped when she was 11, the entire ordeal is just incredibly depressing to listen to, and you're definitely, if you do listen to this or read this, you're definitely going to have to take a lot of breaks. What she went through is absolutely horrific. I don't know if I would really recommend this to anyone. I'm not going to rate it because, I mean, how do you rate something like this? I'm glad I read it. She is a remarkable person. The idea that she was able to get out of this and move forward with her life is incredible. She really stressed the importance of her family, and like that what got her through was thinking about her mom as well as being a mom to her 2 girls, and yeah, it was just an incredibly sad story.